Patrick, just the meeting from Toronto University and arrived. Hello, everybody. I hope all is well.
Salam.
Selam, dear. Okay.
How was that conference, Can Güzel Hocam?
It was wonderful. Talat sang us Yunus Emre songs, so it was wonderful. Very short though, only 20 minutes. And then the Q&A, and then now they are into informal sohbet. So.
Good.
Leyla.
Hello.
Elif Hocam Yekta is asking if you were able to send the link to Mahmut Hoca. Elif Hocam.
Yes.
Yeah. Yekta was asking if you were able to send the link to Mahmut Hoca.
Yes, we did. Can Güzel Hocam.
Okay. Thank you, she says. So I shall mute and stop my video. We have left only 1 minute. Kerimcim kolay gelsin.
Sağ ol ablacığım.
Eyvallah.
Is everything all right with Dr. Mukhtar Ali or?
Yes, everything's fine. I'm just trying to.
You just close the camera. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to arrange everything here.
Good. In one sec, you have been lost. So.
I know. I'm sorry.
Estağfurullah. Please. Please take your time.
All right.
And Özge.
Buyurun hocam.
I think the time is
yes, 8 o'clock. I'm just waiting.
Yes, 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock. Okay. Kerimciğim, şimdi sana bırakıyorum. Sen Muhtar Ali hocamızın müsaitliğini hani tamam dediğinde hocam tamam mı diye ondan okey alınca senden okey alıp başlatacağız. Ben kapatıyorum.
İngilizceye geçiyorum değil mi?
Tabii.
Mukhtar hocam.
Yes.
You can hear me okay, right?
I can hear you, yes.
All right, perfect. We're gonna.
How's my sound?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, good.
All right. Gonna be starting in a little bit if you're ready.
Sure.
All right, I'm just gonna let the participants in and then give a little bit of a summary of what we're doing tonight, and I'm gonna leave it to you.
Sure thing. Let me just correct my spelling for my name. There we go. Everything okay with sound and the picture?
Yeah, sounds great. How do you want me to reference you? Mukhtar Ali?
Yeah, sure. You know, whatever. Dr. Ali is fine.
Dr. Ali. Okay, perfect.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Özge, can we start? We will bring the participants in.
Bir dakika.
Okay.
Buyurun Didem Hanım.
Başlıyor muyuz?
Bunu sen söyleyebilir misin? Belki senin söylemenle daha doğru olur. Duyabiliyor musun beni?
Ben duymuyorum sizi.
So Didem is saying that we have a synchronization problem. Dr. Ali, your video and your sound is not synchronized, so they can't. They are saying that can you refresh your situation? Maybe you can join again.
I'll join again. Give me 1 minute. Okay, I hope the same link will. Okay, 1 minute.
Okay.
How about now? Is it okay?
Buyurun hocam.
Is the sound better?
Can you say one more time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Is the sound better? Is it synchronized?
No, but it's okay.
Good.
We won't
It's
deal
okay.
with it. No.
I
It's
think
okay.
there's a little bit of a gap, but I don't think it can be fixed. That's okay. We
No,
will
I don't
go.
think.
How about now? I think it's fixed now.
Yeah, it seems like it's a little better, but your voice is a little bit down now.
Okay, I'll fix that. Now, can you hear me? Is it better? Okay.
Can I ask you something? Are you streaming video? Are you streaming video? Are you streaming video?
Dr. Ali, Didem is asking whether you're streaming the video.
I'm not. I'm just doing it on Zoom.
Zoom. Okay.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a gap, but I think we can handle that.
Let me see. There must be a way to fix this. Okay. Can you? How about now? Is there still a
Can
gap?
you please say it? Yes, there is, but it's okay. I don't think we'll be late.
How is it?
Voice up.
Voice up. How about now? Can you hear me?
A little bit more.
A little more.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Check one. Yeah. Is there a gap?
A little. Yeah,
Be there.
I don't know why.
that's okay.
There's not only a gap. There's also interference. There's also an interference.
Okay. Can you hear me?
There's a deep sound. Do you have earphones? Do you have earphones?
Check.
Dr. Ali, do you have earphones?
Maybe that's possible. Let me turn down the volume. There's an echo cancellation. Let me turn. Should I turn that off? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you
please.
now better.
Thank you. It will help.
Better.
No, not better.
Not right
No.
now.
Check 1 2 1 2 3. Test.
Not good.
Not good. The volume should be higher. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's good right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Hello.
good.
Check 1 2 3.
Didem okay?
Okay.
It's not, but I don't think we can fix it today.
Okay, let's go. Özge, can we bring the participants in? All right, we're bringing the participants in. I'm gonna give an introduction of how we're gonna be using the system. We're bringing them in. It's gonna take a little bit.
Okay.
We'll just give 1 more minute to
Mhm.
make sure everybody is in.
Okay.
Sorry Sorry for keep you waiting.
Not at all. Just make sure everything is working correctly. Let me check the volume now. Is it too much?
Right now there's a noise. Okay,
Okay.
the noise is gone. The noise is gone. Right now it's great.
There's a noise now? Is there a noise?
Yeah, yeah,
Even now?
yeah.
Yes, can you please use headphones, please? Can you please use a normal headphones and a microphone?
Do you can you actually use the headphone if you have a headphone?
Let me turn it down. How about that?
Can you
It's
speak?
not helping, actually.
Check 1, 2. How about now? Is it better?
It's still low. The voice is low.
How about now?
The voice is great. I mean, I can hear you, but I'm not
Yes.
sure if Didem can hear the.
Okay, let's start.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah?
All right.
Okay, good.
Let's go ahead. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us
Herkese
for tonight's lecture. And we're gonna have Mukhtar Ali, Dr. Mukhtar Ali, with us tonight. Again, I'm gonna give you a little bit of explanation on how we're gonna be using the system. On the bottom part of your system, you will be seeing a world-like icon, and right below that, you will see two different channels, in English and Turkish. So whichever language that you want to hear, just select that one. The raise hands, we're not going to be using this for this session. Instead of raising your hands, please go ahead and send your questions through the chat. That way, in the QA part of this session, I can actually find your questions and ask your questions to Dr. Ali. And that's going to be, he's going to have 45 minutes of long text. He's going to tell us he's going to make this presentation. And after that, we're going to go into the QA session. And from that chat, I'm going to be reading your questions, and we're going to be getting answers from Dr. Ali. Again, we're very much excited for tonight's event. As you know, we had 2 events before, and this is our 3rd event. And next week, hopefully, we're going to have a joint panel with all of our doctors, instructors. And that's going to be next week, Saturday, same time. Just want to let you know about a little bit about Dr. Ali. He has a degree from University of California, Berkeley. He's now a lecturer in Islamic Studies at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. He specializes in Sufism, Islamic philosophy, and ethics, but his areas of interest also include Arabic and Persian literature, Quranic studies, and comparative religion. 2 books that he wrote, he authored. The first one is the Philosophical Sufism, an introduction to the school of Ibn Arabi, and the Horizons of Being, the metaphysics of Ibn Arabi. He also has translated some contemporary metaphysical texts like The New Creation and The Law of Correspondence. Tonight, he's going to be talking about one of the greatest Sufis, as well as the alim, Dawud al-Qaysari. He is an Ottoman alim, scholar, and he actually gave direction to the Ottomans' education system based on Ibn Arabi's Wahdati Vujud system. And I actually am happy to publish One of his books in Nefes in my publications, the introductory to Sufism, and two more books, two more books of him. And I'm just gonna give the microphone to Mukhtar Ali so he can actually enlighten us.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And I'd like to thank the Kareem Foundation, the Muqaddima Ibn Arabi Society, Institute of Sufi Studies at Üsküdar University for hosting this event. And I appreciate their invitation. Now, tonight's talk I have entitled Dawud al-Qaysari. Dawud al-Qaysari's Muqaddima, the essential introduction to Ibn al-Arabi. Now, we have, in the past few sessions, we've been enlightened by the previous scholars on the nature of understanding Ibn Arabi from different perspectives. Tonight, I would like to focus on one particular thinker who is one of the preeminent commentators, Dawud al-Qaysari. Now, of course, I know this is a very important question that everyone has been asking in the chat and after the session, is what is the first step to studying Ibn Arabi? What is the first, is there an introductory text or work, or how do we enter this great ocean as we know Ibn Arabi? Now, of course, if you dive straight into the ocean from the middle, or you jump off a cliff, certainly there are very slim chances of survival. But if you enter the ocean from the shore or from a place of safety, then this is a sure-footed way and something which is a safe and a reasonable, rational approach to the study of Ibn Arabi. Now, that being said, there are a few historical details I'd like to cover. First of all, we want to look at one particular work of Qaysari, which is called his Sharh Fusus al-Hikam. Now, as you know, that there are over 120 commentaries written on Ibn Arabi's work, Fusus al-Hikam. So this is considered to be one of the pinnacle works of Irfan or Sufism. And I'm using this word Sufism, but really the term is Irfan. Irfan is from Ma'arifa, which means gnosis. And rarely have these authors have used the term Sufism. They use Arif, they use Ahlullah, the people of God, the Gnostic, the mystic, the people of realization. So keep in mind that throughout I will be using these terms interchangeably to describe the thinkers and authors and the Gnostics of this school. Now, we begin by examining Dawud al-Qaysari's prolegomena or Muqaddima. The Muqaddima is a 12-chapter introduction that Qaysari wrote at the beginning of his introduction to the Fusus. When he commented on the Fusus, he wrote a very, very clear and precise exposition of the doctrines of Ibn Arabi. He wanted to summarize that. And this is popularly known as Muqaddimat al-Qaysari. Now, before I go into this, let's contextualize Qaysari's spiritual and academic or scholarly lineage. So I want to briefly talk about a few of the key figures who led up to Qaysari. The first one is Sadruddin al-Qunawi. As we know, Sadruddin al-Qunawi is considered to be the greatest expositor of Ibn Arabi's works and the foremost of his students. Ibn al-Arabi and Qunawi's father, Majduddin, were friends, and Ibn Arabi married his widow, becoming Qunawi's stepfather. While still in his 20s, he was granted permission, ijaza, to transmit all of Ibn Arabi's writings, having had the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, as he stated, recited to me from the beginning to the end a year earlier. Qunawi was the first to give structure to his master's teachings, systematizing and popularizing them through philosophical language. A later commentator, Abdurrahman Jami, says about Qunawi, he says, "It is impossible to understand Ibn al-Arabi's teachings concerning the oneness of being in a manner consistent with both intellect and sacred law without studying Qunawi's works. So this school, the school of Ibn Arabi, or perhaps we can say philosophical Sufism, is largely a product of Qunawi's recasting of Ibn Arabi's doctrine into the language of philosophy to reach a larger audience. In other words, as Professor Kilinch said in the very first lecture, that Ibn Arabi is primarily known as a mystic, not a philosopher. So he was the sahib, or the recipient of unveilings of mushahadat, mukashafat, and all different types of unveilings which he writes about in all of his works. So that is why we find that there is a sort of lack of organization in some of his writings. There is organization, but there is also a lot going on, and it is difficult to make sense out of what he's saying at what place. So we have to rely often on the commentators. Now, let me make this one point, that in the study of Ibn Arabi, we usually have two approaches, or two essential approaches that we have to consider. The first is to study Ibn al-Arabi through his own writings, and this is obvious. And the second important aspect of the study of Ibn Arabi is to study the commentarial tradition surrounding his works. So there is an entire tradition starting with al-Qunawi, going on to Jandi, then his student Kashani, and then we arrive at Qaysari. So I want to explain just a little bit about these founding fathers of this school. So when we understand Ibn Arabi, this idea of wahdat al-wujud, all of these terms, they have been giving a certain structure and organization through the writings of Qunawi and Kashani and so on. Now keep in mind that Qunawi, Jandi, Kashani, and Qaysari, all of them who we consider to be the founding fathers of this methodology, and the organizers and the ones who gave this school structure, they were also trained philosophers. So when we come to the writings of Qunawi, sometimes we find that they are more difficult than Ibn Arabi's original writings. Even though he tried to simplify from one perspective or organize, we find that they are also more difficult. Or we can say that they are more philosophical. And this is true with all of the authors we find in the entire trajectory of Ibn Arabi commentaries. Now, it should not be imagined that Qunawi, despite being a philosopher, promoted analytical reasoning over intuition. In other words, he did not prefer reason over kashf as a means of arriving at truth. His aim was simply to describe the realities witnessed by direct experience through a shared terminology of philosophy. Now, there are a few things with respect to the historical characteristics that emerged from Qunawi's writings. One author, one modern scholar, James Morris, stresses some salient features. The first is that Ibn Arabi's teachings were maintained through the actual study of his texts, particularly the Fusus al-Hikam. So we see that this text is a way to maintain the tradition of this particular school. Secondly, the intellectual milieu in which Qunawi was writing, there were deep intersections between philosophy, theology, and Sufism. We have in Qunawi's own handwriting a personal copy of a set of glosses of Suhrawardi's Hikmat al-Ishraq. So in fact, they were conversant in the language of philosophy, theology, kalam, Quran, jurisprudence, and all of the different sciences, and we see there's an intersection between all of this in the commentarial tradition. Now, let me move on, because we can talk about Qunawi on, and he was one of the greatest, as we say, if Ibn al-Arabi is Shaykh al-Akbar, the greatest Shaykh, Qunawi is often referred to as a Shaykh al-Kabir, the great Shaykh. only after Ibn al-Arabi, Qunawi's position is solidified as the main expositor of his writings. Now, he writes, Qunawi says one last thing about what he says about the Fusus al-Hikam and the importance, because the reason why I'm mentioning this again is that when we study the Muqaddima of Qaysari, keep in mind that the Muqaddima is the introduction to Qaysari's commentary on this book, Fusus al-Hikam. So this is why it's important to understand how they viewed the Fusus and why it was so important and why it is considered to be the most precious distillations of Ibn Arabi's works. As Qunawi says, it is the seal of his writings and one of his last inspirations, flowing from the Muhammadan station and wellspring of the essence and comprehensive singularity. It came from the quintessence of the spiritual dhawq or taste of our Prophet with regard to the knowledge of God, and intimates the origin of the adwaq, this taste specific to the awliya, the saints, and prophets mentioned therein. In other words, this book, Fusus al-Hikam, is the summary of all of Ibn Arabi's ideas. And in this book, as Qunawi says, there is no doubt that an awareness of the mysteries contained in a book of this stature, whose source of knowledge is that prophetic station, is dependent upon realizing the spiritual inheritance of him who has tasted all of that, having opened and unveiled for him. Now, a brief note about Jandi. Jandi was a student of Qunawi. He was also a great mystic, and he was the teacher of Abdul Razak Kashani. When we come to Kashani, Kashani's major contribution was not only writing a commentary on the Fusus. Now, Jandi was the first to write the commentary on the Fusus, a full-length, massive commentary on Fusus al-Hikam. Thereafter, in Jandi's footsteps, we see that Kashani, Abdul Razak Kashani, Jandi's student, also wrote a very comprehensive commentary, but Kashani focused more on terminology, and also where Jandi was focusing on philosophical discussions, and he branched off a lot, theological and philosophical discussions. Kashani's commentary is more focused, dealing with terminology, and we see that Kashani was a compiler of terms, and he wrote 2 dictionaries of Sufism. One is called Istilahat al-Sufiya, and the second is called Lata'if al-A'lam fi Isharat Ahl al-Ilham, subtleties of nomenclature in the allusions of the people of inspiration. In other words, one of the major projects and successful projects that crystallized the school of Ibn Arabi was the writing of lexicons. Without Kashani's efforts, we would simply see discursive works or commentaries and disparate writings on various topics. But what Kashani did was that he systematized all of the major terminology of the school, which was to be later used and was influential in the writings of every other commentator thereafter. And this is particularly true, particularly important with respect to Dawud al-Qaysari, because Qaysari was the student of Kashani. Now, Dawud al-Qaysari, Qaysari's writings are some of the clearest and most precise exposition of Ibn al-Arabi's writings and teachings. He was born in the central Anatolian town of Qaysariya, present-day Turkey. And he was born in 1250 roughly, or 1260, and he died in 1350. Qaysari's early education was in Qaysari. After having spent several years in Egypt, he returned to Asia Minor and studied in the Tokat Niksar Nizamiya school under one of Nasiruddin Tusi's student. He was proficient in Avicennan philosophy, having studied Hellenistic philosophy and mathematics. And in Sufism, as I mentioned, he was a disciple of Abd al-Razak al-Kashani in Kashan, with whom he studied the Fusus al-Hikam. Kashani was also his sheikh on the path, his spiritual mentor and preceptor. In one of the biographical entries on Qaysari from Abdul Rauf Munawi, he says, Dawud al-Qaysari was a scholar given to religious devotion, the ascetic Sufi who used to partake in spiritual struggle, as-Zahid, as-Sufi, al-Mujahid. These are the terms he uses. He studied the religious disciplines in his hometown, and then he went to Egypt and studied the 3 religious disciplines with the scholars versed in them. Then he occupied himself with Sufism, excelling in them, mastering it, devoting himself to writing about it. He commented upon the Fusus and attached an introduction to it in which he finally explains the principles of Sufism. Sultan Orhan Ghazi built a religious school for him in the town of Iznik, which was the first one built in the Ottoman Empire. This is a very important and significant detail about his life. And he served in the Ottoman school system. He was the head and the founder of this school system, a post which he served until his death in 1350. Thus, because of his political appointment, he was instrumental in the dissemination of Ibn al-Arabi's teachings throughout the Ottoman Empire. He also had an impact on the Ottoman scholar Hamza Fannari. And one Orientalist scholar, Stanford Shaw, notes that the transition between older Arab traditions and those developed under the Ottomans was provided by Dawud al-Qaysari and Mullah Fannari. With respect to the Fusus commentarial tradition, Qaysari's commentary, Sharh Fusus al-Hikam, whose complete title is Matla Khusus al-Kilam fi Sharh Ma'ani Fusus al-Hikam, which essentially means the preamble of select discourse in explaining the meanings of Fusus al-Hikam, the bezels or the gemstones of wisdom. And this represents the third in a line going back to Kashani, Jandi, and al-Qunawi. Now, al-Qunawi didn't write a complete commentary on the Fusus. He simply wrote a chapter heading, so he summarized a summary commentary of the Fusus. But Qaysari synthesized the views of his predecessors. The scholar William Chittick notes that Qaysari's commentary seems to have been the most influential in the eastern lands of Islam from the 14th century onwards. And the late Jalaluddin Ashtiani, the Iranian scholar of philosophy and mysticism, wrote a lengthy commentary on the Muqaddima alone, just the Muqaddima. So Ashtiani has an 800-page commentary just on the Muqaddima Qaysari. And he writes and he says that we have compared Qaysari's commentary with those of other commentators and found Qaysari's to be the best in many respects, even if Kashani's is more profound. The highlight of this commentary is that the Muqaddima stands on its own as an independent work and has thus become a subject of careful study. If the Futuhat al-Makkiyah contains the entirety of Ibn al-Arabi's metaphysics, which is distilled in the Fusus al-Hikam, then Qaysari's Muqaddima can be read not only as a summary of the Fusus, but as the summary of Ibn al-Arabi's entire doctrine. Ashtiani maintains that the Muqaddima is the best of Qaysari's writings. For this reason, the Muqaddima has become a seminal text, studied in the traditional learning centers as well as in private circles. In other words, to answer this essential question, how do we start to study Ibn Arabi? Well, in the past, the Muqaddima al-Qaysari was the first book that was read in the study of all of Ibn Arabi's works in this entire school. Once you studied Ibn Arabi, the Muqaddima al-Qaysari with a teacher, then one would go and study perhaps the Fusus itself, or Ibn Turka's Tamhid al-Qawaid, and then they would move on to, and I'll explain a little bit in a moment, but let's see what Qaysari himself says about his studying and how he came to understand the Fusus al-Hikam itself. Qaysari acknowledges that he experienced visionary states. He also relates that while he was studying the Fusus with Kashani, he became the recipient of divine assistance. He says in the preface, God had granted me with an understanding of meanings possessing brilliant luminosity and inspired me of the significances containing lofty mysteries. He showed me in my inner secret a bearer of good tidings who would lead me to my gnosis of this book. I was singled out amongst my companions to have received knowledge and acquire meanings without prior reflection and learning. It was assistance from God, the generous, and a grace from the merciful Lord, because he affirms by his support whomever he wills from among his servants, forging success in the mystery of his origin and return. Now, a few other points on this. There is something to be known about how to read the Muqaddima. Muqaddima al-Qaysari is not, even though it is an introduction to this commentary, it is considered to be the first text that is studied, an introduction. It is at the same time not a very easy text. And the reason for this is that Qaysari was writing for a different time. He was writing for a different audience. He was writing for a philosophical audience, or an audience that was trained in traditional scholastic scholarship, which includes theology, kalam, philosophy, metaphysics, and all these disciplines. So what he's doing is he's combining some philosophy with the school of Ibn Arabi. And this is exactly what his predecessors did. Not only did Kashani do that, Jandi certainly did that, along with Qunawi. So we see that reading the Muqaddima of Qaysari does require just a little bit of philosophy, and it requires some background or some ability to deal with philosophical concepts when trying to understand Ibn Arabi. Now, even though this is a very interesting point, and that is, even though the main thrust of Ibn Arabi's system is based on mukashafa, unveiling, spiritual experience, mushahada, divine gnosis, we see that the study of his works relies on intellection, reason, and some philosophy. So there seems to be a tension between the two. But keep in mind that it's not a tension fundamentally, in the sense that the authors, including Ibn Arabi, used philosophy as a tool and a means to describe the verities of Sufism, or the haqa'iq. Some of these haqa'iq are not easy to express. And generally there have been two modes of expression in the Arfan. There is the poetic tradition, so we find Rumi or Ibn al-Farid, and they use poetry to express the ma'ani, or the meanings that they experience and they see. In this particular school, there is some poetry, but the choice method of explanation and exposition has been philosophical vocabulary. So we see that they start with, Qaysari begins the discussion with al-wujud, being. And then he goes on, and then he talks about the divine names and the maratib al-wujud, the different levels of being, the awalim al-kulliya, which are the degrees of being, the universal degrees, and so on. So when we come to the actual table of contents of the Muqaddima Qaysari, we will see that it is important to kind of have the keys of understanding why he included these chapters and what is, as we said, since the Muqaddima Qaysari is the summary of Ibn Arabi's thinking, then those chapter headings also are significant. In other words, those 12 chapters represent the most important themes in all of Ibn Arabi's thought. The first important theme is wujud, being. Then, or we can say ontology, being qua being, the privative and positive aspects of being, necessity, contingency, impossibility, all of this which the Urafa or the mystics, the Gnostics refer to as al-Haq. Al-Haq is God Almighty, but they equate it to the philosophical term wujud, because sometimes it is, yes? Do we have a question?
We didn't go to the questions just yet.
Oh, okay. Okay, fine. I thought I heard something. Okay, now, so the first chapter discusses ontology or wujud. The second chapter explores the divine names, their divisions, the positive and privative attributes. So there are some dimensions or some concepts that are carried over from kalam. But then he goes into the division of the names of beauty and majesty, al-jamal wal-jalal, the mothers of the names, the ummahat al-asma, the mafatih al-ghayb, the keys of the unseen, the names of the essence, attributes, and acts, the engendering of the names which produce other names. Some names are universal, some are particular. The dominion, the governance of the names, and those names which relate to creation and those which do not. So these two chapters are fundamental aspects of the whole cosmology, the whole metaphysics, wujud, the maratib, the degrees of being, and the asma. Then we come into the manifestations or the aspects of divine manifestation. So in short, I'll go through some of the chapters, some of the main ideas, but we can say that the book can be divided, or the introduction, the Muqaddima, can be divided into two major themes, as with the entirety of Ibn Arabi's thought. One is jihat al-haq, which is the side of the divinity, and the second aspect is the side of man. So the two major themes Ibn Arabi discusses throughout. Everything is either concerning God or concerning man, and the relationship between the two. Al-haq wal-insan. Those are the two pivots of all of his thinking. So we can also see the Muqaddima Qaysari as being divided into these two major themes. Those things which concern divinity, the levels of divinity, the divine names, the ideas of substance and accident, ayan thabita, the archetypes, and so on. And then we have insan al-kamil, the different levels of the human being, the inward aspects, the microcosm, the macrocosm, and so on, and man's trajectory, the circles of existence, his coming from Allah and his returning to God, and so on. So this is one theme. The second way to approach the Muqaddima Qaysari, as we said, divinity in man, or the divine levels and the created levels. So not just man, the human being, insan, but the created levels, the levels of creation. So there are some levels, such as alam al-asma, alam al-arwah, and so on, which are considered to be the divine levels, the a'yan, the objects of divine knowledge. This is divinity. This is before creation. And then Allah or God creates, and then we come to the levels of creation, the created levels, such as the aql, the intellect. As the hadith says, the first thing that I created was the intellect. So from the intellect, then we have the nafs, and then the jism, and so on. So we have divine levels, and excuse me, and the created levels. Another division of approaching the Muqaddima al-Qaysari or all of Ibn Arabi's writings is by looking at either things which are ontological, existential, that concern being, wujud, such as asma, everything which is created is wujudi. Or we can look at it epistemologically, not just what is, but how do we come to know it? In other words, what are the modes of cognition, of perception? Is it reason alone? Is it mukashifa, mushahada, musamara, dhawq? What are the different aspects? Ilham, wahi. Ibn Arabi talks and divides all the different modes of cognition that are available to the human being. And this is essential because when we study Ibn Arabi, we have to see that what we're studying is only being filtered into our intellect, into our intelligence. We're reading the words, but there must be a transference from the words on the page to the levels of the heart and so on. Or there must be spiritual experience that accompanies the reading of his works. So this must be also kept in mind when approaching these texts of Irfan. Irfan is fundamentally, the source of Irfan is light, is illumination, is kashf, mushahada, and so on. It was put down onto paper and it is to be transformative. This is the objective of these writings. So we see that these are two major themes. What exists and how do we know that it exists? What is the nature of existence according to how we come to know it? Epistemology studies knowledge. It is a theory of knowledge. And this is one of the essential pivots in all of his thinking. And in fact, Sufism in general, Sufism questions philosophy, it questions theology, it questions all of these different sciences and law as well, positing that there are other ways of knowing truth and reality other than reason and discursive analytical reasoning. This is the hallmark of Tasawwuf and Arfan, is its epistemology. So we ask, what is the difference between Kalam and Ibn Arabi? What is the difference between philosophy and Ibn Arabi's thinking? When we only look at the metaphysics, we find that they are very similar. But it is in the epistemology where we find that there is major differences. Now, and there are other smaller aspects. So now in the later chapters, we see that the 5th chapter describes the universal worlds or the divine presence. And as we said, these are the levels of creation, the created worlds, one of them being the divine world, depending on how the different commentators divide the universal worlds. There are 2 essential chapters that Qaysari talks about. One is the chapter on Alam al-Mithal, the world of imagination, and then he talks about the chapter on unveiling. As I said, these are the chapter on unveiling deals with epistemology. He also deals with the concept of the human vicegerency, this idea of khilafa. And this is a very important principle because we find that in this principle, there are a lot of shared ideas between Tasawwuf and Tashayyu' and Shiism, Sufism, and Sunnism, traditional Sunnism. All of these ideas kind of converge in ideas of Khilafah or Imama or this idea of insan al-kamil. Now, who is that insan al-kamil? Who is the specific? That's another issue. But the theological basis and the groundwork is present, and we find that this is the point of departure for many different madhahib to draw from Ibn Arabi to find a shared common ground where they can plug into the larger framework of Islam or Islamic thought. So we see that these divisions between Sunni and Shia, they melt and they converge in these ideas of insan al-kamil or khilafah and so on. And this is a very important point that we should also consider and take seriously in today's world. Finally, I will end as Qaysari ends with a few ideas on the concept of the resurrection. As we know that among the usul ad-din, the basic usul that all agree on, all Muslims believe in, is tawheed, nubuwah, and ma'ad, and the resurrection. So it is essential that he mentions these three usul ad-din from the perspective of from perspective of wujud, and then he finalizes the Muqaddima with a discussion on the return to God. What does the return actually mean? How do we make sense out of this whole circularity of existence which Ibn Arabi talks about? Yes, and of course he does talk about the fundamental concept of the Muhammadan reality and sainthood and the wilaya, the relationship between nubuwah and wilaya. This is a very, very important principle in irfan, in tasawwuf in general, because tasawwuf or irfan, real spirituality is an initiatic tradition. In other words, the initiation begins with the Prophet, peace be upon him, through the different awliya, to the companions, whether it's Imam Ali or Sayyidina Abu Bakr, and so on. These traditions move through their authority, their spiritual authority. So this wilaya is one of the binding threads of Ibn al-Arabi's cosmology. And so we see that this is represented in the Turuq Sufiya, which is another topic of discussion. But here, philosophically and theologically, we see that Ibn al-Arabi pays a lot of attention to this concept of wilaya, the silsila, the chain of wilaya, going from fundamentally Allah, from God, Allahu waliyul ladina amanu, God is the wali of those who believe, onto the Prophet, and then throughout history, through the different saints and shuyukh and so on, whether they belong to an order or they did not belong to an order. But wilaya is real and it belongs, this is a name of God. So Ibn al-Arabi talks about wilaya, and Qaysari focuses on wilaya in one of his chapters extensively, and he says some of the most profound and eloquent aspects. Now, let me just finish by this. Why has this commentary, Qaysari's commentary, become the most popular of all the commentaries, even though it is the third in the line? There's a couple reasons for this. The first reason is that Qaysari was a very, very good writer. He's very expressive, he's very eloquent, and his style is elegant, it's precise. Not only is he a good scholar, but he's also a good writer. So he's able to capture the essence of what Ibn al-Arabi is saying, or his predecessors are saying. So in other words, in a matter of 80 or 100 pages, he's able to capture the essence of the doctrine. That's one thing. And one of the aspects of being a good writer is not to write in a way which is too complicated. It needs to have precision, yet appeal to the reader. So he appeals to different levels of scholarship. It is appealing to the scholar and the expert, as well as the layperson and the novice and beginner. So in other words, the beauty of this text is that it has wide readership and wide appeal. It is written simply and clearly. There is no extensive philosophical tangents and diversions. Everything that needs to be learned is there in the Muqaddima. Once you have a solid grounding in the Muqaddima, then it is as if you have the whole of the doctrine in summary form, and then you spend the rest of your time developing those ideas, whether you approach the Fusus or the Futuhat or some of Ibn al-Arabi's Rasail or some of the other commentaries, which are not only commentaries, but they are independent works unto themselves. We should see that the commentarial tradition has originality. There are original insights, original scholarship that builds on the ideas and framework of Ibn al-Arabi. So it's not to be seen only as a repetition of what the predecessors said, but also an aspect of original scholarship. So I leave you there, and we will inshallah have some times for question and answers and a discussion. Thank you very much. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. This was great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm just gonna move on to the QA because there are a lot of questions, and just wanted to start really quick. I also just want to add that there are a lot of material in English on the MEAS, the Society's website, and that's suits for everyone: news, article, podcasts, videos, etc. So I just wanted to include that before I start the questions, and I'm moving to the first question really quick. Okay, Ibn Arabi points out in the introduction to Futuhat, in a passage where he is showing nonetheless his appreciation of philosophy, that a Sufi should not be called philosopher, at least in a reductive way. This seems to point towards the need of preserving the distinction between the Akbarian Gnosis and Falsafa tradition, as you did by referring to Irfan. Would you please say something about this? Hope it was clear.
Yes, this is a great question, and yes, Ibn al-Arabi did not believe that philosophy could lead to truth. Fundamentally, it is through kashf and spiritual experience which is the hallmark of his whole methodology. He says, as to quote this passage, in the introduction of the Futuhat, he says, "In what I have written, I have never set a purpose as other writers." In other words, I have never philosophized. Flashes of divine inspiration used to come to me and almost overwhelm me, so that I could only put them from my mind by committing to paper what they revealed to me. In other words, by committing to paper, he needs a vocabulary, he needs a system, he needs a way to describe the verities of what he sees. So according to his temperament, his personality, maybe the majla, his own personality, he decided to use this tool philosophy or this philosophical methodology to put down to paper what he saw. Rumi, on the other hand, chose poetry. Ibn al-Farid chose poetry. Attar chose poetry, and so Jami. So some use both. But, and he says, if my works evince any form of composition, that form was unintentional. Some works I wrote at the command of God, sent to me in sleep, or through mystical revelation. My heart clings to the door of the divine presence, waiting mindfully for what comes when the door is opened. When something appears to the heart from behind a curtain, the heart hurries to obey and sets it down in keeping with the prescribed limits. Okay, that being said, let's answer this question. Philosophy is a tool. Philosophy is the language of the aql. It is the language of the intellect. The intellect, and I don't mean philosophy, proper Aristotelian philosophy, that the aql must only use syllogistic reasoning or analytical deduction. But this type of reasoning, intellection, is a product of the intellect. The qalb, or the heart, or the spirit, or the khayal, they have a different language. The language of the heart is ma'ani, meanings. The language of the khayal is sur, forms. So poetry describes an image, it's imagery. The poet describes the rose and the thorn and the ocean, the fragrant breezes. It's all appealing to your imagination. And within that, he uses the imaginal language to reach a certain meaning, ma'na. I'm talking about the Sufi poet, not the profane poet. Even the profane poet is trying to reach a meaning, some meaning. But here in Sufi poetry, Arfani poetry, there are divine meanings, haqa'iq, realities. So the poet is trying to reach that meaning through the imaginal plane. And here, those same meanings are being reached or trying to arrive at through the language of the aql. And the aql is a way to sift between truth and falsehood. The aql, the reason itself is a divine gift. Al-aqlu rasul al-haq, the intelligence or aql. I mean, how many times does Ibn Arabi and the hadith says, awwalu ma khalaqa Allahu al-aql. The aql, the intellect, is the nur Muhammadi. And what is the aql? The aql, the intellect, is the thing which discerns between truth and falsehood. So we need intellect to discern between true unveiling and illusory things. Sometimes unveiling can be mistaken. Sometimes it can be misinterpreted. Spiritual experience is a vast thing. It's not that everybody sees haqa'iq as they are. Sometimes their haqq and batil is mixed. Like you see a dream, some things are true and some are false. But if you don't have a criteria, if you don't have a language, if you don't have the literacy to decipher the ma'ani, the meanings in the dream from the falsehood, the illusions, then you've lost the dream, you've lost the experience. It's an experience that you have not benefited from, or that you interpreted wrongly and it misguides you. So we need the intellect. This is the relationship between, I don't mean to say philosophy in the way that Ibn Sina was using philosophy, or the Aristotelian method, but yeah, but we see al-Farabi and so on. We see that the intellection and reason has a place in tasawwuf. It's not only experience. Experience needs a measure and a criteria, and this is the use of the intellect. It is not philosophy in the way they have imagined philosophy to be. I hope that addresses some aspect of that question.
I think this has been addressed very, very well. Going to the second, and there's a lot of interaction going on the chat. People asking questions and some of them getting answered. But I'm going to ask this question again. Is it possible to obtain a transcript of this wonderful lecture so as to conduct research? We don't know the correct spellings for Ibn Arabi's successor school of thought for 4 founding fathers' names. I think this has been answered during the chat, but I guess, would you please tell us the 4 fathers one more time?
Yes, so we have, after Ibn al-Arabi, we have Sadr al-Din al-Qunawi, Mu'ayyid al-Din Jandi from Janad, and Abdul Razak Kashani, and then Dawud al-Qaysari. Now, if anybody wants to read Qaysari, this Muqaddima Qaysari in English, the translation is available. You can definitely find it on PDF somewhere online. So this introduction is there. Muqaddima al-Qaysari is there. Whoever wishes to look into the text, it's an Arabic and English parallel translation. So you'll be able to follow along with the Arabic. If your Arabic isn't that strong, you can strengthen your Arabic by reading and get the terminology. And of course, a translation is an approximation. You know, there's so many ways to translate these terms. They're realities, haqa'iq. So that's something to keep in mind.
Perfect. All right, a little bit of a heavy question. Could you please tell us how Qaysari interprets the concept of time in Fusus al-Hikam?
Let's see. Concept of time. I don't think I can answer this right now. Yes, I would need to look specifically what he's saying about time. And
No
then,
problem.
yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't answer this.
No, that's fine, because we're going to have another session
Yes.
next week,
Okay.
which we're going to be talking about these things anyway.
Yes.
So I remind you about this question. As a marginal comment, we know now that the book Latif al-Ilam that has been mentioned was written by an unknown author, not Kashani. Soon a new edition, as Bakr al-Latin announced, will appear and clarify more. So it's like more like a comment.
Thank you. Yes, it's good.
And the other question is Qaysari commentary translated into English? That has been, I think you already addressed this one.
Yes.
All right. Another question is, some aspects of modern Western philosophy like phenomenology and modern theories on language and consciousness seems to have traces of philosophy of Ibn Arabi. How much of the philosophy of Ibn Arabi can be compared to the modern Western philosophy? What is the future of modern philosophy in this sense? Do you want me to repeat some of these, or is it understood?
Well, I mean, it's a general question of influence. How much has Ibn al-Arabi influenced, let's say, modern philosophy? First of all, you know, which particular thinker, which aspect of modern philosophy? We don't know if there may have been thinkers who have read Ibn al-Arabi in other languages or translations and then incorporated his teachings into their own. Keep in mind that this whole idea of sourcing or giving credit is more modern, as a modern phenomenon. You know, in the past, we see, like, let's take Abdurrahman Jami. Abdurrahman Jami wrote this book, Naqd al-Nusus fi Sharh Naqsh al-Fusus. This is a commentary on Ibn al-Arabi's own summary of the Fusus. Professor Kilinch mentioned this in the first lecture. He says the Fusus al-Hikam is the book that he revealed in his Kashf from the Prophet. But Ibn al-Arabi thought that this book was so important that he decided to write a summary of the book. In other words, like a 10-page distillation of this book, which he calls Naqsh al-Fusus, the engraving, like a fuss, the ring. This is the gemstone. This is the fuss. But there's the ring, the naqsh is the engraving. And what is engraved on the gemstone is the sir, the secret, not the summary, the sir. So the mystery, the sir, the inward aspect of the Fusus al-Hikam is to be found in the naqsh. Now, Jami takes this naqsh al-Fusus and he writes a commentary on the naqsh. So we have commentaries upon commentaries, and it's a very convoluted kind of concept. You have to separate it in your mind. But what I'm trying to get at is that Jami cites over 500 different quotations from different authors in this book, never referencing a single author. He just brings them into his compilation. So this is the style of scholarship that existed, and it was perfectly legitimate and it's okay, it's acceptable for them. But now we must cite our authors and reference where we get our ideas from. So I cannot answer what the extent of Ibn al-Arabi's influence was in modern scholarship. You have to take it case by case.
Yep. Great. Okay. Very interesting and good question about wilaya. There are so many these days. So how do you know whom to follow?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. This is a question about the wilaya. Wilaya. There are so many these days. So how do you know whom to follow?
You mean so many teachers? So many shuyukh?
I believe so.
Okay. I mean, this is not an easy question to it's easy to answer. Practically, it's not. The question of finding a good teacher has a number of things. Number one, the first aspect is divine guidance. God is the first teacher, and God leads you to where he wants you to go. If you are seeking God Almighty, he will find you a teacher suitable to you at the right time. If your orientation is in that direction, this is the first and most important principle, that all you need to do is turn your heart to the teacher, the real teacher, and then the lesser teachers or the shadow teachers, the dhil or the awliya will appear before you. That's one principle. Now, the second principle, which also should be kept in mind, is that a teacher and a system of thought, a teacher, let's say a wali, is based on two things. Number one, their character, the qualities that they give, and their knowledge. Arfan, arafa, man arafa nafsah. So the nafs is there. Man arafa nafsah, faqad arafa rabbah. So he who trained, who disciplined himself, herself, exhibited lofty character, this is somebody to follow. Ilman or amalan, whether it's intellectually or in behavior. If you can combine the two and you find a wali who is not only lofty and sublime in character, but also lofty in knowledge, then that knowledge has signs. See, the Quran says, bring your proof, bring your evidence. Fa'tu burhanukum. So everything has a sign. Everything has an evidence. What is the evidence of wilaya? What is the evidence of sheikhhood? Someone claims to be a sheikh or a spiritual guide. They have to give evidence. The prophets gave evidence. The miracle was their evidence. The Quran is the evidence, and so on. So the sheikh cannot invite himself or invite others to himself without providing some form of hujjah. And what is the hujjah? It's not necessarily miracles. You must see, miracles. The basic criteria is the ilm, the knowledge. If you weigh and measure the knowledge which comes out of their mouth or their writings, measure their knowledge, the knowledge should speak for itself. So there's two things, knowledge and amal. And you can follow someone in knowledge, but not in amal, someone in amal and not in knowledge. And ideally you want to combine both. So it's not an easy thing, but like I said, if we always refer to the first principle, which is
I think your microphone is off right now, but that was perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next question would be, where can we study the Muqaddima in detail and following the traditional way today?
Now, again, this goes back to the previous question I just answered.
Yeah.
It's not so easy to find traditional teachers nowadays. Mm-hmm. Someone who is capable, qualified, who knows the different terminology, who's well versed in the school of not just Arfan, but also understands the nafas. There's a nafas. There is a taste, a flavor for this methodology. Ibn al-Arabi's school has a nafas. The different spiritual masters have a nafas. Nafas means like a color, a style, a spiritual style, a methodology. So a person not only needs to know what's written on the page, but also should carry the nafas of the ustad. So it's not easy. I don't have an answer for you to say a satisfactory answer, say, oh, go here, there's a school, there's a program, there's a teacher who's offering, lessons in Muqaddima al-Qaysari or, Tamhid al-Qawaid or Fusus, what have you. This is the challenge of our time, that this type of scholarship is dwindling. And it's the work of, Karim Foundation, IBN ARABI Society, and these type of seminars, which are reviving, and this is the word revival, Muhyi ad-Din. He's the reviver of the religion. And so this is a revival of the religion and his methodology, which is the religion, Deen. So it's true to its name, Muhyi ad-Din.
Thank you. Great. Okay, next question. May or how Arabi's texts lead or help modern world's humanity to reach the absolute truth? What do you think about this?
This is a very good question. The path of truth is knowledge. So whatever knowledge, and not all knowledge, but the sublime knowledge, knowledge of God, knowledge of his essence, knowledge of his divine names, knowledge of realities. So these teachings, these books, these ideas contained in these texts and this tradition is a system which will help you uncover reality. It will teach you to look deeper into the world, into the nature of existence, into the nature of the self. As again, we go back to this hadith, man arafa nafsa, he who comes to know himself comes to know his Lord. And this has been quoted, in every book of Arfan from the beginning, from the Prophet up until today. This is it should be on the flag of every, Sufi author. So this self-knowledge and this awareness of the ayat, afaqiyya wa anfusiyya. Anfusiyya means the signs in the self, which is self-knowledge. Afaq is the horizons, which is the world. And the third type of book, the Kitab Allah, the third book is the Kitab al-Takween. Takween, Tadween. Tadween is the written book. So the written text, which means the Quran, or any text which follows in this light, such as Futuhat or these books, which are illuminating, this must correspond to the other two books. So if we were to summarize this view, which Ibn Arabi talks about, the munasaba or the correspondence between the three books, Takween, Tadween, and Anfus or Nafs. So each one of them helps you to decipher, understand reality. And this is what we mean by the modern world. We don't want to get stuck in an ancient time. We want this knowledge to be, again, muhyi, living, to revive ourselves in this day and age. This knowledge has to be applicable to us in our condition, and it is. But it only becomes that way if you understand how to read the self, the world, and Tadween, Quran and Hadith, and then these spiritual texts. So there's three readings here, not just reading one.
All right. Perfect. Okay. We have another 10 minutes. So I'm going to ask you the next question. Well, that's a simple question, she says, but it says, how do you define soul?
This is the hardest question. Not the
I know.
It sounds simple.
Yeah, from the Ibn Arabi's point of view, obviously.
Okay, this is a good question, and I'm glad we can talk about this now. Now, the soul, is one word in English, which translates to nafs. Fundamentally, insan is ruh. Ruh means spirit. So first of all, we want to think about the insan as spirit, ar-ruh. وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي. This is what God says in the Quran. We have breathed, and when we have breathed into Adam or insan, our ruh, something from our own ruh, this is called spirit. When this spirit comes into the insan, or it comes and combines with the jism, the body, it gives life to matter. Because spirit, by definition, is cognizant, is aware, is life-giving. The fundamental quality of ruh is life. Matter has no life intrinsic to it. It's just elements. But only when it comes in contact with the ruh, whether it's ruh insani, human, animal, or vegetal, any type of ruh, then it gives matter, it gives it life, it endows it with life. That first order of being, which is life, in the body is called the nafs. So the nafs is closest to the jism, the body, nafsani. Then that nafs grows from vegetal state, as you see in an infant. It's only vegetal, doesn't speak, doesn't think. It goes into an animal state, and then it comes in, it grows, it develops into a nafsan nataqa, or a rational intellect, which is defined as the human intellect. Then this human intellect or intelligence also takes different directions. It has different relationships. When it looks upwards and when it looks towards the ruh, then it's called qalb. And then a qalb forms inside the human being. It's born out of this relationship between nafs and ruh. So it is given birth to a qalb inside the human being. The qalb yataqallab, it goes back and forth. Sometimes it looks to the higher worlds, and sometimes it looks to the lower worlds. When it looks to the lower worlds, then it is, we can say that that's how it comes to know the world. So it yataqallab, it goes between these two worlds. And an aql, intelligence, is that qalb, it's the same thing. It's all one thing. Ruh, nafs, qalb, all of this is all one thing. And this is exactly what Ibn al-Arabi means by wahdat al-wujud. This is the philosophy of wahdat al-wujud, that insan, human being, is one. Wujud is one. It's all one thing. But it has different manifestations according to the different divine faces or aspects or manifest theophany. Allah wished to reveal himself, his essence, in multiple colors. Just like you see one piece of light you see is one. When it goes through a prism, then it breaks into different colors. It diffracts. You would never think that this light that you see, contains within it all these different colors. How is it there and you don't experience it? So there needs to be a medium, something to split the rays, to see the different colors. When you see the colors, you see it's purple, it's blue, it's red, it's yellow. And so you see this multiplicity. The Arif, the Gnostic, he sees the one light. Or one who's higher than that, he sees the one in the many and the many in the one. He doesn't only see wahdat al-wujud. He sees wahda fi ayn al-kathra, oneness in the midst of multiplicity. And he sees multiplicity in the midst of unity. This is wahdat al-wujud. It's such a simple thing. Nothing complicated. Everyone makes a big fuss about it. It's so simple. It's oneness in multiplicity. It's like you're driving a car and you're talking to your friend, you're drinking some coffee, your hands on the steering wheel, your foot is on, and you're looking around, and everything has to be in sync. You make one mistake and you can crash the car. This is wahdat al-wujud. Your wujud is one, but you're doing many things all at once. How do you do that? How do you explain that? So anyway, so nafs is just one plane of the insan. This is where jihad happens. This is where the human being struggles with himself by using the power of the aql and the qalb, harnessing the aql and the qalb to train the nafs, not destroy or kill the nafs, to train it.
Thank you. Beautiful. Two more questions, I guess. This one is, it was mentioned earlier that al-Qaysari was involved in Ottoman education. Is there a way of incorporating his ideas into the modern education system?
I mean, I don't know exactly curricularly how it was incorporated. I know that he had a political post. Haj Karim may be better to know some more details about this. But I would say just in general, as education is concerned in the modern world, if we do not have spiritual education, whether it is in the secular system or the masjid culture, the culture, or any type of modern establishment, we will be lost as a civilization. We will only see the outer word and the outer form of Islam, or even that will be lost. So Islam is there to develop insan and to develop the spirit. This is the only reason why the Prophet has come, and to, of course, establish an order. But that order cannot be established until there's a ruh. As we said, the body has no life until it is infused by the ruh. And the ruh of Islam is its meaning. The shell is its form. So without meaning, it has no life. And this ruh, to train people how to harness ruh, ruhiyya, spirit, spirituality, meanings, this is part of our challenge. How do we incorporate this? I mean, I can't tell you specifics about how Qaysari did it or how Fanari did it, or others who Haydar Amali, how they did it. And of course, we need something different. We can't just take their template and apply it to the modern world. But I think what's important is to create places and avenues to develop ruh, spirit, meanings, teach people meanings. That has to be a part of the curriculum, without doubt.
All right, one last question. What would you say in Qaysari's understanding of the relationship between Valaya and eschatology?
Which aspect of eschatology?
I am just, let me see. What was your question about eschatology? Let me see.
Which aspect of eschatology?
Yeah. Let's see if we can get an answer. About eschatology and ma'ad.
Right. الله ولي الذين آمنوا يخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور. This is the verse of Ayatul Kursi. We know this is a very powerful verse which says, Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu yukhrijuhum min adh-dhulumati ila an-nur. So God is the one who takes you from the darkness into the light. So the wilaya is essential even in the day of judgment, in the resurrection. The whole idea of wilaya is where is your orientation? What is the silsila of your wujud, of your being? Where is the wilaya is a principle of wujud, of existence. Who do you relate to? Do you come back to? And this wilaya is the thing which is going to show you the way into the other world. Wilaya is, through wilaya, receive guidance. So wilaya is an essential part of Islam. Is wilaya. If you want to know what is Islam, Islam is wilaya, in one word. Why? Because you are giving the wilaya to Rasulullah, the Prophet of Islam. You're giving your allegiance to the Prophet and as it is commanded in the Quran, that your authority is the Prophet. Alastu awla minkum min anfusikum, as the Prophet says. He says, Alastu, am I not more in authority of you than you are of your own selves? So the Prophet establishes wilayah from the very beginning. And this wilayah that you come into the next life in the resurrection. Of course, it's based on deeds, but your deeds have a munasabah. Your deeds have a relationship to your orientation. I hope that's clear. I'm not sure, because it's a really like tenuous sort of idea to try to link wilayah to the last moments. Ultimately, it is your orientation. Where do you incline to? Where do you face? Who is your wali?
Yep.
Okay, your wali is your guide, is your authority. And then sometimes it says, and the others, shaitan is their wali. Means he's the guide, he's the leader. He takes them minan nuri ila dhulumat, from the light into darkness. So the believers are following the wilayah of the awliya, of Ahlullah, ultimately of Allah. And this is why this word saint is from wali and wilayah, awliya Allah. So after the Prophet, who are the highest level of the awliya. And if you look at what Ibn al-Arabi says, that wilayah is a circle which is enduring, never ending. It begins with Allah and it returns with Allah. Whereas nubuwah began with Adam and it ended with the khatam. Nubuwah is sealed. Wilayah is not sealed. So wilayah has a greater scope. Ibn al-Arabi says, and also in al-Qaysari, he says that wilayah is the batin, is the inward aspect, the haqiqah of nubuwah. The reality of nubuwah, of prophethood, is wilayah. So wilayah is that enduring thing which you need in this life and in the next.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we get to the end of our session. And next week, hopefully, we will be having our hojas, professors, a summary of each presentation, and then we're gonna go into QA, a long QA. Thank you so much, Mukhtar Ali. It was great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the society. I thank the society as well for this beautiful event. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. We'll see you next week, inshallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.